Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Great. Actually, it's Brisbane, not Sydney, and you can appreciate that on the weekends I enjoy sunny weather, and I was actually kind of fraught with fear as I was flying into Christchurch and seeing all these snow-capped mountains going, oh my God, a Queenslander's just going to wither in this weather. But fortunately, Christchurch has come out with some pretty good sunny weather today, so thank you. It's great to be here. Look, it's an interesting topic because often people look and talk to us and say, a bank, how does a bank innovate? Large corporates don't innovate. They are stale and they are stodgy and they are hard to move. I'm here to kind of talk a little bit about how we actually do innovate, and for example, ASB has done for 170 years. It's a sustainable business, and it's done that by being on the forefront constantly and reinventing itself to a certain degree while remaining true to its customers and its markets, similar to many banks across the world. But I won't tell you how to innovate. That would be me telling you to suck eggs, because Kiwis, like Aussies, innovate extremely well, are very creative in their own right, and they do that out of necessity and geographic location. What I do find, though, is this challenge with New Zealanders and Australians thinking small or operating small, and or biting off scraps in local markets and not going for bigger pieces of pie at the global stage, and or creating lots of activity and innovation within their own ecosystems, but clashing with each other on a regular basis. So I want to talk a little bit through about that. But first off, I just wanted to kind of frame it up a little bit. It's an exciting time for us at the moment in this particular century. Does anyone know this piece of work at all? Perhaps this period of time of art? Someone want to take a stab or a guess? It's Renaissance period, yes, thanks. 15th century. So the artist is Pietro Perugino. In my early days in 1996, I studied art history at the University of Queensland for a year. I was never going to be an art historian, but I really enjoyed the area. So for a year, I kind of studied work and artistic works, not around actual wanting to be a painter, but understanding the framework behind art. And in this particular period, there was a lot going on. And it wasn't just about art in itself. It was actually about using and experimenting with new techniques. It was about storytelling. So art had a purpose. It was politicized. It was sponsored. It had certain features or functionality to it that was coded into it by the artists. So if you have a look in there, you'll see things that were quite novel and quite new for the art world at that time. Perspective had just been discovered and was being used right across the art world. They were playing with interesting colors and paints like blue that had never been realized in its true form until this period of time. They were secretive about their work, that artists would drop in small elements or parts into the painting to code stories into it, or to frame up political influences, or to acknowledge their sponsors or their investors, pieces of fruit, or a particular kind of cup, or a particular color of a robe. So these were our inventors of the time, they were our creators, and they were in fact inspiring a lot of people across the globe. And I kind of see us in a brave new world of a new renaissance in the technology world. Our software engineers, software developers, technologists are enabling us and creating all sorts of different variations around technology and its use. And I have to kind of argue against David this morning. He said, you know, we are all in technology businesses. Whereas I, in fact, think that we are all in people businesses, and our skill as technologists tells functions or enables people, as did the artists of 600 years ago. So very quickly, I want to talk about innovation, I guess, to a certain degree, to kind of frame that up a little bit as well. So when you think about innovation, 4 layers of maturity, most often you hear innovation as probably the most overused word besides strategy, solution, and now blockchain. It's in every job title, it's in every tagline. Everyone is innovative to a certain degree. But there are levels or depths and maturity of innovation. So the first one would be the top level, and that is, a few post-it notes on a wall, some ideas stuck up on a whiteboard somewhere, innovation in our tagline or some of our marketing copy or content. It's reasonably superficial, but it's a nice kind of, message to put out to the community. The second level of innovation is more ad hoc innovation or arbitrary innovation, and corporates do this often, is that it's an idea that's been generated from someone across the business who is either in a position of power or has access to resources to bubble up that idea and get it to market. It wasn't necessarily the right idea or the most appropriate idea. It was a pet project, it was a power project, it was one for personal gain. And this is arbitrary innovation, and in some cases they get it right. The next level, when you talk about innovation, is in fact programmatic innovation, and far more scalable, and in a corporate environment, far more democratized. So that is, anyone across the business has an ability and a process for having their idea heard and backed and brought to market. And brought to market off the merit of the idea, not necessarily off the influence of the person and who they are and how they get their business case put forward. And that's kind of where ASB is at the moment. And we've just gone through sort of 2 years of getting that right in terms of scalable innovation to what is now the fourth level of innovation, and that is open innovation. That is co-creation models, that is programs that are done with strategic partners in open environments, and or also open agreements and understandings. So the best of ideas come out and are synergistic and are best for market and customers and sweep right across the industry. And we're starting to go down that pathway now, the fourth level of innovation. And I'll talk quickly to the programs so you can kind of see where and how we're doing that in my next slide. There we are. So very quickly, ASB Upstart is our venturing program, which we mentioned before. So I'm an entrepreneur. I've done all right in my own right. I'm not the greatest. I haven't got a $1 billion unicorn. I'm only onto my fifth startup, and research suggests that it takes about 11 for a serial entrepreneur to get their big exit. So I've still got about 6 more to go before I hit the numbers. I work with entrepreneurs in the bank. They are actually employees who, on the sides, would be doing their kind of hobby startups and their little businesses on the corner of their desks. And what we've done is we've actually kind of created a program for them to kind of event that entrepreneurial spirit into what is a venturing program, and they are entrepreneurs across the bank. They sit outside of the bank, they run their businesses semi-agnostic to the bank, and they actually start targeting and capturing new markets. The second one is ASB Edge, which is a program which we've kicked off that partners with really interesting Kiwi startups. They come and locate or co-locate in the bank, not the developers, not the team, the actual core founders, and they sit and we work together on common problems of our customers, and together we co-create. We pay them a little bit of money, it's not a lot, we don't take any IP, we experiment for 3 months, and if it looks like it's taking off in the market, then they come on board as a full service provider. They gain the benefit of us as being a cornerstone bank for them to work with. We get the benefit, actually, of having true founder entrepreneurs in the business, infiltrating the bank, weaving their ways across the bank, and calling out and challenging bank thinking all the time, so that we move faster, agile, and we stay true to our customers, and not to our policies and to our processes. So everything we're doing is partly around cultural change as much as it is around commercial interest and new commercial opportunities. The other one is Fusion, which is in fact starting to go into this level of open innovation. So some of the machinery, some of the programs that we have running, we actually start to apply that with some of our key strategic partners, which goes into what I was talking about before, co-creation models. We're actually together, large organisations, small organisations, we work together solving problems of joint ownership, joint ventures, and or even open source. So for example, we have one going at the moment where we've taken, or we've driven along and we've put in a little bit of funding, and it's called Cowrie ID. And it's part of what is now growing as a national digital identity forum. And that is a digital identity wallet of which you, as citizens, are self-sovereignly owning your wallets and your identities and sharing it across any number of the organisations on a blockchain setup to be able to kind of seamlessly onboard to anyone who is participating as part of that trust framework. Now, ISB wrote some of that code. We've contributed a lot of money into it, but we don't own the IP. We don't gain anything from it. But what we do get out of it is the fact that we are solving a common problem that all the banks across New Zealand are facing, and or a whole bunch of other government agencies are facing, as well as most of the private sector. So collectively, we've all decided to put down our swords, to not compete on this particular area, and to collaborate and work together to solve a key common problem for customers. And that takes a lot of maturity as organisations and as a nation to kind of do that sort of innovation, that sweeping industry-wide innovation. The last one we do, which is a minor one, is actually we commercialise some of our IP. So some of you may know we have a little yellow elephant. His name is Clever Cash. So he now actually, that technology and that IP is licensed out to a whole bunch of other countries and other banks across the world in other forms where we get a return off that. So you'll see that innovation is now starting to move from being a brand or a tagline to actually being industry-wide, more collaborative, more embracing for good of country versus good of the bank or good of an individual. And that brings me, I guess, broadly to New Zealand. So this is some work from KPMG, very, very comprehensive of a who's who in the zoo around New Zealand's innovation ecosystem. Incubators, accelerators, investors, either VC or angel, universities, tech transfer, Crown research, ministerial governments. This is a great list as a descriptive list. It is very, very challenging as anyone who enters into the country and or who enters into the innovation life cycle to know where they fit in that world and or how they plug in to the rest of the organisations in that world. And this is not uncommon for smaller countries. So the same thing I'm seeing in New Zealand, seeing Queensland where I live. New South Wales does the same thing. They're feudal. They compete against Queensland. Victoria does it even again against New South Wales and Queensland. Yet we are, for example, 23 million in Australia, 5 point whatever in New Zealand, on what is a massive global stage, yet we're still kind of rubbing up against each other and creating our new little initiatives against each other for sort of scraps in the local market. And we can't afford to do that. So in a previous life, I lived in Israel for 4 years. I'm dual Israeli-Australian, so I travel across there on a semi-regular basis. Shana Tova for the Jewish New Year, which kicked off on Sunday night. Israel is about the same population as New Zealand. Israel thinks global right from the beginning. Every single startup thinks global right from the beginning. Everyone networks everywhere, hustles, if you want to call it that word, with everyone for an outward focus. And they live under a common brand, which they have nurtured and developed and are very proud of, which is this notion of startup nation. They become highly successful against all the odds of geopolitical constraints. But what they do well is they come together as a nation and they focus as a national imperative for the survival of the country. And they are soldiers, collectively soldiers of fortune, have done very well for it, have got a good reputation out of it, and are well known for it. Silicon Valley does the same thing. They come together with a common language, they come together with a common identity, They are feudal or competitive to a certain degree within there, but they actually network really, really well, and they bump into each other really well. And all those players in the ecosystem know their role, their function, and how they add value in the ecosystem and the supply chain that is an idea all the way through to an exit. And I'll talk about those clusters very shortly for you. Queensland, about 4 years ago, faced this same problem or challenge. Lots and lots of accelerators that were kind of competing with each other in the market, and incubators and investors. Some were getting the best deal flow and some weren't. You know, there was infighting all over the place all the time. Most of it was good, healthy competition, but it was kind of in a narrow perspective. Advanced Queensland was born about 5 years ago off the back of some really good research and then a really good approach from the Queensland government to start to bring all these players into one room and get them to not be descriptive about who they are, but also about how they pipe into each other. So they've laid down a whole bunch of policies and programs, and you can go onto the website and have a look at it, and that's all about the piping to make sure that all these players know where they fit and how they add value in the chain of ideas all the way through to exit for Queensland entrepreneurs and the innovation ecosystem. I'm not saying it's the best approach, but it has been a really good, solid approach of which they are starting to get this notion of startup nation, Silicon Valley, advanced Queensland. Everyone in Queensland put their swords down and started working together for the benefit of the state versus themselves. So these are the general clusters that you would find in an innovation ecosystem. Definitely government plays a role in there. They kind of oil the wheels and the mechanics to make all of this work with policies, with programs that support, fund, open doors, provide sustainability, longevity. You have enterprise in there, corporates taking in technology, partnering with startups, providing the channel and distribution for some of those really great ideas and those really good technologies, and doing it in a way that it's collaborative. It's not winner takes all. You have researchers, universities, tech transfer who are sophisticated about getting great IP out of universities and putting it into the hands of some pretty aggressive, clever entrepreneurs to capitalize off the value of that IP. They make it easy, they make it accessible, and they make it fast. Universities and Crown Research, I should say. You have investors who are clever, who have got a risk appetite, who are sophisticated, who mentor and coach as well as invest, who provide deal sheets and terms that are fair and reasonable, and who provide the capital for all of this to kind of work. Obviously, you have the entrepreneurs themselves, the ones who are clever and smart to spin a buck out of all of this, to make it scale, to get it to market, to show chutzpah and tenacity and the resilience required to be the soldiers of fortune. But what's really important, which was mentioned this morning, is the storytellers. The media have a role and a responsibility to play to broadcast these stories and to support the ecosystem, not at a national level, at an international level. Because right across the country, there is great stuff going on, and we never hear about it overseas. So the media has a role to play in all of this. And when all of those clusters work really well together and pipe in at the right moments, you have a very sophisticated, very mature, and very impactful, effective ecosystem. So we're currently doing some work at the moment with KPMG, where we are starting to bring representatives from all these clusters to the table so that we take this description of these are all the who's who in the zoo and put it more to this is how they all pipe in and this is how they all add value and impact each other. So that we become as a nation far more effective, not in local stage, but in international stage, because we can't afford not to. So if you think about some of the numbers that are coming out, right? So Global Entrepreneurship Monitor says that there's 100 million startups started in the US every year. Now, even if you get a fail rate of 99%, you've still got, what's that, 1 million coming through? 1 million startups that will succeed every year. And not succeed as in hobble along, succeed to grow and be regional and then be international and global. And one of those startups every year will be a unicorn, a 1 in a million event of an organization that grows to be over $1 billion in valuation within a 5-year period. So there are unicorns already in existence every year coming out of the US, and we have no idea who they are. We won't know for 2-3 years yet, and they will pop up in our local market, and they will conquer us in whatever the fields they are, and they won't hold back. They pivot quickly. Once they go after one market, they go after another, and another, and another. And they do it with international, global, conquer the world, winner-take-all mentality. And little New Zealand startups, Aussie startups, can't compete by doing that individually on their own. We need to do that collectively together. So partly this work is really about bringing all of us together, making clear how we all pipe in with each other, how we add value to each other, and then kind of start doing our own conquering. So if you're interested in any of that work, please let me know, because we're meeting on a monthly basis. We're trying to make sure that that's all national. We have everyone from those certain sectors represented, and we're starting to grow as we speak. And that's it. Any questions that I can take from the audience?
I have some for you.
Oh, do you? Okay.
As voted in by our audience, those who prefer to do it a little bit more quietly, which is all good. So a nice easy one to get started, I think, Leigh, is do you think it is ever too early for a startup to start thinking about an expansion strategy?
No. So I think every startup benefits from thinking global from day one. So for example, with our ventures in ASB, those are all employee-run ventures, and they are owned by the bank at the moment. So you would think that they would only have the interest in bank customers, bank operations, bank products and services. They don't. So we treat them like an international startup, where they use the bank as their first cornerstone investor and their cornerstone customer. They use the New Zealand market as the local testing ground, but every one of them is being geared up in a way that they can go international at any point. And as I mentioned to you, some of the work we're doing on commercialisation around our things like Clever Cash and IP is also going to be hitting those ones as well. How do we take some of that IP that we've created locally, we've de-risked it to a certain degree that we can hand it over to other banks and other territories, and then they can take it internationally. I don't think there's any stage, there is no good stage of not thinking about expansion and global expansion from day one.
Great answer. We have another one here around, it probably talks to what you were mentioning before around working with a particular bank and how you can leverage the relationship you have with them. So the question then is, how does a bank innovate products in a way that an external partner involved doesn't get limited to just that one bank's market share?
Yeah, yep. So that's again goes back to, I guess, some of the philosophy that we're trying to adopt within ASB. And I can't say that for normal products and services in ASB that focus on Horizon 1. What I do and my team, we focus on Horizon 2, Horizon 3, and we are far more collaborative about that, again, where we make sure that we are the cornerstone, either cornerstone investor and cornerstone customer, but we're setting out our own ventures for example, but also encouraging other startups that you will then be selling off to any other bank your services. We're not expecting to have exclusivity or blockout clauses or anything like that. So we're actually setting up some of our own ventures to cannibalize our own business. Because if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it. And if we don't allow others to kind of do it to a certain degree, we're going to be left behind anyway.
Great. I've got another one here which I think is really critical. There's a lot of focus around entrepreneurship, but then there's intrapreneurship as well. So how at ASB do you foster that internal creativity and intrapreneurship?
Yeah, so again, unlike most corporates where you will go in and you will work in a business unit and you will work into a role within that business unit and you become a small cog in what is the greater machinery, as I mentioned, we take a subset of our folks, we take them outside and I actually get them to run their businesses. So like any entrepreneur in this business who's running and setting themselves up and trying to get their first customers and is actually sort of doing the marketing and the tech and the copyright and doing their finances and their budgets and so on, and you are a person of 1, 2 or 3, so are some of our ASB folks who have never done that in their life, classically trained in a particular business unit with a particular role as a single cog of many. So that's partly does two things, right? It cross-skills them. It satisfies a whole bunch of folks who are wanting to be entrepreneurs or have that kind of creativity and desire and commerciality about them. And rather than have them leave the bank and do that off the side of, their own efforts, we support them to vent that sort of spirit and express that kind of spirit. But also, it means that by default, they start to become responsible for ASB as a whole. They become responsible as decision makers as their own venture. They transform and change in attitudes. So as I mentioned before, our programs are about commercial opportunities, 50% commercial opportunities. Where do we find the next best thing? But also cultural change. Some of my teams don't make it all the way through. We actually send them back into the bank. And once they've gone back in through the bank, they've actually been exposed to outside. They've spoken to customers. They've walked the pavement. They've done their testing and their measuring with clients, direct face-to-face. Some of them would never have done that. They've done business modeling. They've done rapid prototyping. They've actually designed logos and brands and written copy. They've pitched to customers. So they're a different kind of person once they come back in the bank.
Great, so pretty much out of time, but there was one extra question that I think expands nicely on what you were just mentioning then, and that is how do you go about stimulating innovation in a company where there aren't those formal processes around forward thinking and new thinking, and in particular, to use your word, perhaps they're a bit stodgy?
Yeah, so I think where we've managed to get some good success within ASB is, it might sound a little weird, but my CFO, about 5 or 6 or 4 or 5 years ago, hopped on a plane and went to Singularity University, drank the Kool-Aid, saw what was going on over there, came back and went, we seriously have to do something about this. So at the most senior level in the bank, I've got good coverage, good air coverage, and good support from my senior executive. Now, if I didn't have that, I would face what is a common problem in corporate environments, and that is called middle management permafrost. Young juniors want change, executive know they have to change, and middle management don't want to do it because it's distracting, it's intimidating, it's compromising their KPIs. So it's got to be kind of a situation where you do your programs and you balance out the top in terms of oxygen, the deal flow and the talent and the resources down the bottom, and take out the intimidation in the middle so that you get all of this fluidity across the whole organisation.
Great. That was fantastic.